Hey everybody, Invisiblekatana here, and today we are discussing the lady in red, the femme fatale of Resident Evil herself, Ada Wong. Now, of course, Ada Wong is one of the most well-known women of Resident Evil, especially considering she is like the potential love interest. Of course, as of right now, she is like probably the #1 theory prospect for who the F did Leon end up marrying, but she's always in there with Leon, so he's, especially now, he's the poster boy, especially, once we get the remake era and everything, and he becomes a poster boy. Of course, his pseudo love interest, or at the very least, his, flirting interest, is of course gonna have a lot of recognition. Still pissed off personally that they took her out of Village. I find that to be super odd, because I'm like, I would have loved to have seen that, especially because the costume looked like it was gonna be sick. But Ada Wong, of course, making her first appearance visually, we will definitely say, of course, in Resident Evil 2, but of course there is the whole thing where it's like, hey, they made the code in the RE1 remake, Ada. I don't believe that was in the original. That's one of those things I cannot recall 100% if that was in the original as well, where the code from the Umbrella Scientist was Ada, but definitely in the remake, it was like, hey, if you put Ada in, there it is, that's the code, so that was like a reference to her. But Ada Wong, she comes in, she's the cool femme fatale, whether it's the original version of RE2 or the remake of RE2, and she's just kind of stuck around as that ever since. We don't know much about her, we don't know really where she's from. It's been referenced and, theorized, so to speak, like, hey, that might not even be like her actual name is, Ada Wong. So there's a lot of things to it, where it's like we don't really know exactly where she's from, what she does. We never really know who she's working for, but she always ends up, helping out herself, because she'll always have somebody that she's dealing with, whether it's Wesker and RE4, working really for herself when it comes to RE6, because that was really more so just, that was, in all honesty, I think 6 was really just her having a straight up revenge plot, because it's like, I'm tired of this dude, he's super horny for me, common, issue I'm sure she deals with, but it's like, this dude's just super horny for me, and I'm tired of him, like, and that was pretty much about, like, that was kind of her story. It was like just the weird things she had to deal with, because this guy was like, Ada Wong is super effing hot, and it was like, he was really just a product of the community, if anything. It was just an insert of a lot of people in the community, I would imagine. But Ada Wong has always been a cool character. She's definitely been the most prominent side character of the entire franchise, because outside of her having her own little DLC campaigns, she's never had a full game. Like, she's never been the main character of a game, but she always comes in. Like I said, RE2, she gets to have her, she's the secondary character portion. RE4 comes in, she shows up a bit, and then when they did the PS2 version, then of course she got her Separate Ways campaign. But even before that, she was the one that got the extra mode. She got Assignment Ada, which, by the way, I always reference this when I'm talking about the characters. My favorite costume that Ada ever had was that Assignment Ada costume. And I hate that we didn't end up getting that in the RE4 remake. Like, even if they didn't give us Assignment Ada again, like, I totally understand them not remaking that and just sticking with, Separate Ways. But I was like, man, I would have loved to have seen that Assignment Ada costume. I always thought it looked super cool. Maybe throw in, like a little bit more red, because it really was just like a black tactical suit. But I thought she looked super cool in that back in the day. And I was like, man, this is like my favorite costume of hers. But she's always been the side character that got to have something special. And when 6 came around, everyone, if they have their own campaign, I count you as a main character. So even though there were 100 million main characters in that game, she does count, as far as I'm concerned at least, as a main character. Can't say the same thing for Agent, the mystery dude that they just randomly threw in there, because they're like, everyone has to play co-op, right? So aside from that dude, everyone in RE6, gets to be an actual main character. And Ada was no exception. And she was cool in that. Of course, coming in, she's always got some cool costumes and stuff like that. I would say, if we're going on favorite costumes, because I might as well talk about it, because she doesn't have so many that it's ridiculous to go through like every single costume. But her original RE2 costume, I personally like more than her Remake 2 costume, where she's in like the dress. I like the jacket version. I think she looks pretty cool in that. And then once it's like her regular costume for the rest of the game, I'm like, I don't like it nearly as much. I don't think it's as cool. I actually like her original one a lot more. So I would definitely say I love the original version of her RE2 costume. As far as RE4 is concerned, like I said, Assignment 8 is my favorite costume there. And then, her dress was cool in that. Her Remake costume, the only thing I don't really like about it, honestly, is like those weird gloves. That's like the only thing. I have like a weird thing about like just generic gloves. Other than that, her whole costume is pretty sick in that one, where she's got like a full body turtleneck with like the insane thigh high boots and everything. I'm like, she looks really cool in this. I just hate the gloves. I just hate how they look. She also has the coolest looking knife in the whole game, because her knife is black. I always thought her knife was like the sweetest one in the game. The remake dress, I do think, is an improvement over the original dress, although it's super weird that it's a brand new dress and not just the original dress remade, but that's a whole remake problem. And then her RE6 costume I actually thought was pretty cool with the button-up shirt and everything. I always thought that was pretty sick. I can't recall like all of her costumes from the movie, so we're just going games off of that. I guess I should have specified that, but there you go. Those are the Ada costumes. Not really ranking, just my thoughts on them. But Assignment Ada would be my #1 costume for her personally. But love her costume, love her character. You know, the mysterious spy that always comes in. You know, she got, what, I think in RE6 she had like the crossbow, and then for 4, that's where they kind of introduced the grapple hook, and that kind of became like her big thing, where she has the grapple hook in the remake of 4 as well. You know, they kept that around. But even in 6, same thing. Like, she has the grapple hook and she jumps from location to location. They kind of kept that as like one of her mainstays in the franchise, which I thought was pretty interesting. I was like, okay, I don't mind that. You know, it allows her to fly around. You know, in the remake, you get like an insane boss battle from it during the Separate Ways campaign, which I thought was incredibly amazing. I was like, okay, this is pretty awesome. So that was pretty great to have. But Ada as a character has always been fascinating. You know, it's like, will we ever learn more about her? Will, you know, of course, her and Leon, will they ever end up in an actual relationship? What's the deal with her character? What's she gonna end up doing, you know, as we go further in the timeline? What role does she play? Is she just gonna constantly be working for the villains, and every once in a while she might be on a small revenge quest? It's a big mystery. Like, we don't really know. And admittedly, she's not in a lot of games. That's one of the funny things about Ada. Like, I mentioned that with a lot of characters as I've been going through, you know, talking about everybody, where they don't have a lot of appearances. She's always been the character that was just on the sideline. She got 2, 4, and 6. Like, she's always been in like those specific games. And to this day, that's still where she is. She got the remake versions. And like I said, the thing that keeps her popular is, for one, you know, she's got the attractive feature going. And 2, she's tied to Leon. So like I said, you know, you get whatever character is like the shipping love interest for the current poster boy of the franchise, that character is of course going to be insanely popular for people. So it's interesting to see her popularity be so high right now, because she was always cool. You know, like, don't get me wrong, I've never been like, oh, Ada, like, who cares about Ada? She's always been sweet. Like, she's always been super cool. I remember playing for, I did not know that was going to happen. Holy crap. I'm in a rental car right now, so, you know, things are different. But that came out of nowhere. That was crazy. But when I first played, like, the original RE4, and, you know, she drops down and, you know, she just shoots Sadler. Yeah, Sadler in the back. And then it's like, holy crap, was that Ada? You know, it was like, you know, a woman in a red dress. That seems familiar. That was like the text if you go up to the window. And I was like, holy crap, Ada's in this game, which we may or may not have known. You know, admittedly, we probably knew that, but, you know, it's still just really cool. I didn't know about that specific cutscene. Even if I knew she was in the game, we didn't know about that cutscene, like her first real introduction. And it's like, this is kind of cool. You know, like, Ada's going to be here. And she looked cool, and it was definitely interesting. And, you know, still no answers technically to how she mysteriously lived, but that's Resident Evil. It's like, hey, some things just happen. Some people are just here, some people are just there. Technically, she lived even in the original game. Like, she comes, you know, like, she helps Leon at the very end, where it was like, was that really Ada? So it was like, she lived even in that game, but it was still, you know, it's still crazy that she lived. You know, they need to do something. Maybe she fell in a bunch of trash like they do in RE4. Maybe, you know, one day they can just throw that in the game and be like, oh yeah, I fell a pile of trash. Like, oh, me too, that's crazy. So I don't know what we're gonna get from Ada. Of course, with theories abound, aside from just the, you know, she's the potential wife character, she may or may not also end up getting a DLC where they throw her in. I'm really curious about that. I don't know if that's really gonna be the case, because the main thing about RE9 is that it feels so focused, where it's like, how could they if they throw in another character, it would just be like a totally separate story, which I would love to see. Like, if they randomly did that and they were like, hey, we are putting Ada in this, and she has like a totally separate campaign, I'd be like, okay, that's very interesting. It doesn't have to tie into the main campaign. It can be its own thing, and that might even be cooler, because then it's like a totally separate side of, you know, whatever's going on. But, you know, of course, odds are it could end up being Chris. But wouldn't it be nuts if they did like 2 new characters? Well, I shouldn't say 2 new characters, but if they did 2 characters for the DLC, and it was like, yeah, Chris got his reference in the game, and then he comes into the actual DLC, but then Ada also gets to be in the DLC as well. That would be pretty nuts. I don't know if we should really expect that or anything, but that would be pretty cool if they did that. And we'll see what happens with the character going forward. She's always been an interesting character, even before, you know, the remake era, where, you know, there's more people now into the Resident Evil games than there have ever been, just because there's more people getting into gaming and more people recognizing that it's effing amazing. So of course, you know, there's more recognition for Ada, and a part of that does make me wonder why they wouldn't have kept her around for RE8. I never really looked into it. Like once I found out that was the thing, I was kind of like, I kind of don't really want to know what any other plans were, or if they were gonna have Chris and Ada in the game, which I think once again would have been really cool. Especially considering 6, that wouldn't have really mattered for most people that started with 7. But that would have been really cool if they had brought that back, even though they figured all that stuff out and it was pretty nuts. But I still would have really liked to have seen that interaction between those characters. Like, I'm still like, you're still not great. Like, even though she didn't do what Chris thought, like you're still not that great, But I've always liked Ada. I feel like I say that every time. Like, I like this character. I like all the it's Resident Evil, so I like everybody. Shout out Ark Thompson, he's a dude. But I always liked Ada, and I've always been curious, like, where do we go with her character, especially her not being in 9, where it was like, and I know people are upset about that because it was kind of weird. It was like, it's the first time Leon's been in a game, not counting, Gaiden, where Ada doesn't show up. So that's kind of weird. So I know people are a bit bothered by that. I wasn't too concerned. I was just kind of like, I would have liked more, I've mentioned this several times on this channel. I would have preferred if Jill was in this game because I think that would have made the Raccoon City stuff a lot better. But Ada not being in it is very interesting, just because that's just been a natural trope that we've come to expect. Like, hey, if Leon's here, Ada's gonna pop up at some point as the femme fatale, or, in the case of 6, straight up have like her own campaign. But other than that, it's like, all right, it's cool. It would be great to see her just because once again, it's been a hot minute. If we're going off of the actual games, she was in 6. So, she hasn't had as much of a time gap as many other characters have. So she got to be in like the latest, until 9, of course, the latest game that actually started showing off, bringing back, main characters as like the main playable characters, with Chris just having his little pop-up appearances. But we'll see what ends up happening. I've always liked her character. I feel like there's really not much to say because most of her existence is through guest appearances more than anything else, or side character appearances, and then being given a main character spot in RE6 alongside everybody else. And of course, like I said, her showing up in, I think she does only show up in like, admittedly she might only be in like the very second CG movie, Degeneration. I think that might actually be the only one that she ended up showing up in. She might be in 2. I always forget like the details of that, where characters do and don't pop up, but she might actually only be in one of the CG movies, and it was like the very second one, and that was about it. But we'll see what happens going forward. I am curious if she does end up being, the character that gets to grab the spotlight for the DLC. I'm not gonna hate it. I'm gonna be extremely curious what her story's gonna be, because like I said, that goes back to, is she working for the Connections now? Is she working for herself? Are they gonna say like, man, someone in the Connections wants to go against the Connections? Very generic evil villain stuff, like we're this whole collective group. But also, what if we fought each other from within? It's pretty easy, and in all honesty, I think that's what they're gonna do at some point in Resident Evil, because that's how evil organizations work. The bad guys always end up fighting against the other bad guys, but then they still fight against the good guys too. So we just kind of have to wait and see for all that jazz. But as far as Ada Wong is concerned, she's always been a cool character. She's always been, the super spy doing her own thing. She's got a I can't say a heart of gold, but like a piece of her heart is definitely gold plated, because she won't just go through with everything that's evil. So she's not the worst person ever, but she's also not the best. Like, she's still kind of just doing her thing and, messing with Leon and everything like that. But she has led to some really funny moments in the franchise as well. Like, the old line from the original RE4 where she takes off and lands like women. They have a much better version of that if you never played Dark Side Chronicles, because they mix all the games together to keep all the playable characters with each other. So when you play RE2, Leon and Claire are together the entire campaign. And in that, they have a version of Claire meeting Ada, which is like one of the best things I think we've ever gotten in the franchise, because I always thought it was so funny. Claire straight up hates Ada from the second one. She's basically like, I don't trust this bitch. Leon, why are you so horny? That's basically how it was. And it was just such a funny interaction where she's like, Leon, I don't trust her at all. You're just going with her? He's like, yeah. And I forgot exactly what the dialogue was, but Claire said what she said. And then Leon was just like, women. And then she's called him out on something. And then Claire was just like, men. And I was like, this is a hilarious interaction. So they kind of took that, because that was definitely after RE4 came out. And that's why they put that in Dark Side Chronicles, to just make them both say it. Definitely one of my favorite little moments. And it's because Claire was like, Leon, why are you so horny? Like, clearly, she's untrustworthy. This random bitch just popped up out of nowhere in a zombie apocalypse, and you're just going along with it? And he's like, we can trust her. And she's just like, man. And it's like, that's one of my favorite interactions between those two. And it's technically not canon because it's the Dark Side Chronicles version of 2, but I always thought that was super funny. So you can easily find that online because it's been popping up a lot more because of how much people want to see Claire in the remake for Code Veronica, and then also all the conversations about Ada not being in 9. So a lot of people kind of reference like, hey, here's that one time that they actually met each other in that non-canon version of RE2. And it's a hilarious interaction. I always love that moment. So I highly recommend looking that up. And if you can, play the Dark Side Chronicles games. I thought those were awesome. I really regret not getting Umbrella Chronicles for the Wii U. It was like the day the eShop was going down, and it was like I couldn't get the stuff in time. I waited till like literally like the last minute, and I didn't end up getting any of the games, and I was super upset. I have Dark Side Chronicles, but I wanted to buy Umbrella Chronicles and the Wii version of RE4. I wanted that so bad, and I screwed up, and I don't have them, and I was like, dang. But Dark Side Chronicles was the junk. I loved playing that like crazy when I first got that back in the day. But Ada Wong, Femme Fatale, pure mystery. We don't know when she's gonna show up. We don't know what she's gonna do when she does show up, but she'll probably look super cool. She may or may not be in a dress. I don't think she always has to be either. I think not just the remake, but even RE6 showed that she can look really cool. Like I said, my favorite outfit is Assignment Ada, and that's just a straight up generic, black. It's really more gray than anything else, but like a gray tactical outfit. So I actually like her when she's not like the lady in the red dress, which she hasn't been for most interactions. But I always thought she was super cool, like everybody else does. She's definitely got that hunk aesthetic, but way more character because she at least is in the actual effing storylines outside of cutscenes. So always appreciated her as a character. Always been curious how far they were really gonna go with her backstory, or lack thereof, I should say. So we'll see what happens with the future of this franchise, if she starts to get more spotlight, or if they always keep her as like, hey, she's the secondary character. At most, she might get like a side DLC campaign. We'll just have to wait and see. But for now, I would love to know your thoughts on all things Ada Wong. Favorite costumes, favorite moments. What do you want to see her do in the future of the franchise? Would you ever want to see her just straight up join the heroes? I don't think that's ever really gonna happen. I think she'll always be that, in that sort of anti-hero position, whereas like I said, not a heart of gold, but she's got like some gold-plated, speckles in there somewhere, where she won't just be like, Wesker's saying like, yeah, trillions of people will die, and she's like, well, no, because that's effed up, dude, so I'm not gonna do that. So she, every once in a while, she'll do something cool, but she'll always just F over Leon, because that's kind of what she does. Like, she's kind of horny for him, but not horny enough to actually bang him, and then it's like, all right, I'll see you later. And then that's about it. That's Ada Wong. Super cool, horny for Leon, he's horny for her, but she keeps him where he's at, and then they just keep on keeping on. So we'll see what happens going forward. Like I said, if they do ever bring her back, unfortunately, I don't think they'll ever have much of a reason to do the RE8 costume with like the Plague Doctor look. But if they ever threw that in there somewhere random, if they're, if we did get Mercenaries mode, and they're like, hey, we're just gonna throw in Ada just because she's a popular character, that would be sick if they were like, hey, we're gonna give her the costume. They won't ever do that, by the way. Like, I'm just throwing that out there. That's just like a random thing where I'm like, that's a mod situation where someone's like, hey, I made the costume based off of this concept art. You gotta go to the mods for that sort of thing. But it would be nice if Capcom did it themselves. But it'll also be nice if we see her in general. So like I said, I wanna know your thoughts on all things Ada Wong. Where does she rank in the placement of characters for you guys? What do you think of her? Do you care? Do you not care? Do you wanna see more? Do you not care if you see more? All your thoughts, I want to hear about them, so please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.